Mine with the book, what Thoreau did with his family in the house, typically for what they did for leisure was they read books aloud. And they would play the piano, and they would do singing, and they would play chess. What else did they do at home, dear? So for our morning coffee, we're doing reading aloud, exactly to follow along with Henry. Once Henry. We're reading page 335. Once Henry had a chance to size up Joe. His doubts vanished. He was a good-looking Indian, short and stout, with a broad face and reddish complexion. We're reading about how Thoreau, when they went moose hunting, was actually hunting Indians. The history of Indians with his pen. Eyes turned up at the outer corners. Ation was an experienced lumberman, and he wore the river driver's practical clothing. Wool pants, cotton undershirt, red flannel undershirt, and black cassock hat, and an India rubber raincoat, the only one of them equipped for the weather. You see? Some people are actually equipped for the weather and others aren't. Do you know I have a whaling, a wet rubber raincoat for going out whaling, whale watching. At noon.
That's part of your being minimalistic.
It's part of my non-minimalistic collection.
Yeah.
I have an old Cape Cod
That's
yellow
everything.
raincoat, which I'm going to have to go whale watching or get rid of
Still
it.
have it.
Well, it's actually a raincoat. I don't know what I'll do. I'll have to consult with Maria Kondo and the Kondari method. At noon, they reached the carry, and the cousins walked on ahead. Henry with his eye out for plants. George with his gun out for partridges, while the little railway drew the baggage on behind to west branch of the Penobscot River at the log camp at the north end of the carry. The cousins lit a fire and boiled tea for dinner while Ation pitched his canoe, carefully blowing a small flame from a firebrand onto the birch bark to soften and spread the mix of resin and grease. Testing it for leaks by setting the canoe on crossed stakes and pouring water into it. I narrowly watched his motions, noted Thoreau, and listened attentively to his observations, for we had employed an Indian mainly, and I might have an opportunity to study his ways. He observed that the Ation swore once, "Damn it, my knife is dull as a hoe." But what Ation thought of being put under such close inspection is not recorded. He must be the Indian. But anyways, these canoes, remember, are probably just wood or something.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to have a wood canoe?
No.
Why would you want one of those aluminum ones? That's horrible. Soon they were in the canoe, baggage in the middle.
No.
Ation on a crossbar in the stern, the cousins in the bow, complaining. No matter how he sat, grumbled Thoreau, the position was unendurable. While they paddled on, looking for moose sign, he pressed Ation for Penobscot names. See, he's pestering this Indian for Indian language stuff. Chacoconuslu for chickadee, Wasus for bear, Apasus for mountain ash, words that Thoreau thought had possibly never been spelled before, but he pronounced them carefully until his informant said it would do. The only moose they saw that day was the rotting carcass left behind by hunters at their campsite that night, which gave Thoreau pause. But he reminded himself he was not sorry to learn how the Indian managed to kill one. His role would be innocent as reporter or chaplain. That evening, they pitched their tent and went out hunting, Ation calling again and again through his birch bark horn, but all they heard in response were the nearby timber cruisers, and once in the twilight, a dull, dry, rushing sound with a solid core to it, a bit like the shutting of the door to the damp, soggy wilderness. What was that? They whispered to Ation. Tree fall. It would be funny to be in the woods and a tree falls. The tree falls down. Thoreau never forgot the beauty of the moonlight on the treetops, and he went to sleep watching sparks from their campfire ascend through the firs. The next day, they got their moose. Here they got a moose. Have you ever seen a moose?
Mm-hmm.
Up live and personal?
No.
You ever seen one in the wild?
No.
I did. I went to Maine. You have to practically go to Maine to see moose. There's not that many in Vermont and New Hampshire. The next day, they got their moose. Thoreau had begun to lose faith in their Indian guide, who disconcerted him by saying, "Yes, sir," and "Sartain," and whistling, "Oh, Joe's Susanna." But in mid-afternoon, when Henry called his attention to the crackling of some twigs, Joe back-paddled a few feet, and there they were, a cow moose, and her half-grown calf looking around the alders at them like great frightened rabbits. George fired his first barrel at the mother, who spooked away. Then, as she paused to look back at her shivering youth, he leveled his second barrel at the calf, which fled up the hill. He leveled his barrel at the calf? God. Joe landed the canoe to track their victims. Now Henry was impressed. He proceeded rapidly up the bank and through the woods in a particular elastic, noiseless, and stealthy tread, looking to right and left on the ground and stepping in the faint tracks of the wounded moose. This is horrible. They shot a moose. We're going hunting with Henry David Thoreau, now and then pointing in silence at a single drop of blood. After a half hour too soon, Henry thought. Joe gave up, and they pushed on upstream until suddenly there she was, the mother, lying warm and dead in the water. Henry grabbed her by her ears while Joe pushed the canoe ashore, where with Joe's assistance Henry measured her with the canoe's painter cord, 7.5 feet tall, inaccurately he later concluded, and 8 feet 2 inches long, a grotesque and awkward animal, the true kind of man at home in this wilderness. And then began the butchery. Joe now proceeded to skin her with a pocket knife, while I looked on, and a tragical business it was to see the still, warm, and palpitating body pierced with the knife, to see the warm milk stream from the rent udder. There were 4 tits. How many tits does a moose have? How many tits?
I don't know.
Does a moose have? And the ghastly, naked, red carcass appearing within its seemly robe. Some of the muscles continued to twitch even after the skin was stripped off. Goodness gracious. The hunters were not sated. They sampled a little moose meat for supper. Rather like veal, thought Henry, and they were off again, thrashing upstream through brushes and drift logs. Henry was in a dream state. Henry is like in a dream state. Was he the moose, or was he the hunter of the moose? By the time they returned to camp, he had had enough. While Ation and Thatcher hunted on downstream, Thoreau stayed behind, and by the light of the campfire filled pages with his visceral shock and horror. You think it's horrible to kill animals? The afternoon's tragedy and my share in it as it affected the innocent destroyed the pleasure of my adventure. Hunting for subsistence was one thing, but this hunting of the moose merely for the satisfaction of killing him, not even for the sake of his hide, is too much like going out by night to some woodside pasture and shooting your neighbor's horses. They are God's and my own horses. Late that night the hunters returned, having seen no more moose. On Henry's insistence, they hauled up a quarter of the meat, a great weight for a small canoe. At least some of it would not go to waste, rotting pointlessly in the wilderness. The next day, a Sunday, we're reading this on Sunday morning readings. Reading aloud in the style of the Thoreau household. Are we supposed to be watching the New York City Marathon or reading this book?
When today?
The next day, a Sunday, there was no hunting. Instead, they paddled to Ansel Smith's. Do you think he's a relative? Ansel Smith's logging camp at the head of Lake Chesuncook. I have to look up where that is. Where friends of Ation's walked in and reported on moose hunting. Up north. Lousy, so bad that Thatcher, though eager for more, gave up his plan to hunt up that way. Thoreau had stepped out for a walk and was sorry to learn he had missed the Indians camped nearby. But it was too late to visit them, so he made do with inspecting the logging camp buildings, bateau, farm, livestock, blacksmith, and a cool cellar where they left the moose meat to feed the loggers. Thoreau and Thatcher stayed the night in the comfortable bedroom at the lodge. It's nice after going hiking and camping and all that stuff to stay in a nice lodge or motel. See, when I got out, once in a while when I was camping, I would stop and stay at a nice hotel. While Ation stayed at the Indian camp the next day, they backtracked up the Penobscot to the north end of the carry. Henry stayed near Joe the whole way, closely observing how he paddled so powerfully and walked so noiselessly. He wrote more Penobscot names for everything and tasted all the berries Joe sampled. When they reached the carry, 3 Indians were camped there, smoking moose meat and clearing moose hides. They shared their cooked moose tongue. Tough, they apologized there not being time to cook it properly. We read to 338 in Thoreau Life.